historical education tracks the rise of global empires over 2 millennia. But in the Americas, the timeline contracts, starting just 500 years ago. This chronological gap ignores a significant reality. Long before European arrival, these continents were home to complex civilizations that developed in total isolation from the rest of the globe. The human story here actually began 17,000 years ago. Early migrants crossed the Bering Land Bridge from modern-day Russia into Alaska, eventually fanning out to settle the entirety of North and South America. This deep geographic separation created a unique human ecosystem. For thousands of years, thousands of tribes thrived in a world completely hidden from the trade networks and conflicts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. While the Americas remained isolated, the Old World economies relied on a dense web of land-based trade. Wealth flowed from the markets of India through the Silk Road, sustaining the European economy for centuries. That economic flow was severed when the rising Ottoman Empire seized control of the Middle East. By blockading the Silk Road, they cut off the primary eastern artery for European trade. This blockade created an immediate severe economic crisis. To survive, European nations invested heavily in naval technology, desperately searching for a maritime path to the riches of India. This search for a new trade route inadvertently placed Europe on a collision course with the Americas. A geopolitical shift in the Middle East had effectively pushed a naval armada into the Atlantic, toward a world they had no idea existed. Christopher Columbus gambled on the geography of a round Earth, sailing west to find the East. He was searching for a shortcut to Asia, unaware that 2 massive continents sat directly in his path. Upon reaching the Caribbean, Columbus incorrectly identified the land as the Indian subcontinent. He labeled the local populations Indians, a misnomer that would define the indigenous peoples for the next 5 centuries. The magnitude of this error became clear 5 years later. Vasco da Gama successfully rounded the southern tip of Africa to reach the actual port of Calicut, proving that Columbus had discovered a new world rather than a new route. The colonizers viewed this new territory through a lens of racial and cultural superiority. They classified the tribal nations as uncivilized, creating an ideological justification for the total extraction of land and resources. The arriving Europeans treated the Americas as a blank slate. They saw a continent to be owned and exploited, rather than a collection of established civilizations to be negotiated with. While the colonizers brought superior weaponry, their most effective tool of conquest was microscopic. Because the indigenous population had been isolated for 17,000 years, their immune systems lacked any defense against foreign pathogens. They were biologically vulnerable to the germs the Europeans carried. Common Old World diseases like measles and chickenpox turned into apocalyptic plagues. They raced through tribal communities far faster than any invading army could march. Some historical evidence suggests this spread was occasionally facilitated with intent. Reports indicate colonizers sometimes distributed infected clothing and food, using disease as a strategic tool to empty the land for settlement. The scale of this collapse was staggering. At the start of the colonial era, an estimated 15 million indigenous people lived across the continent. By the 1890s, that number had reached its lowest point. Only 250,000 Native Americans remained. This mass mortality effectively cleared the continent. It allowed for a total demographic replacement, where European settlers could build an entirely new society over the remnants of the old. The colonization of the Americas followed a fundamentally different path than the British rule of India. In India, a small European minority ruled over a massive existing population. Because the native people remained the majority, they were eventually able to organize and reclaim their own sovereignty. In the Americas, the near extinction of the indigenous population meant there was no native majority left to rebel. The land was instead filled by a growing population of European descendants. Consequently, American independence represented a split within the colonizing class itself. It was a transfer of power from the British Crown to the European settlers who had made the continent their home. The United States emerged as a geopolitical entity built upon the foundation of an erased civilization, a nation established by the very people who had replaced the original inhabitants. Despite the centuries of displacement and loss, the story of the Native Americans did not end in the 19th century. They have persisted, maintaining their presence within the modern United States. Today, 574 federally recognized tribes exist across the country, preserving distinct cultures and histories that predate the colonial era. This heritage remains visible in global culture through prominent figures like actor Jason Momoa, who represent the continued integration and visibility of indigenous lineages. The relationship between these tribes and the modern U.S. government mirrors a broader historical pattern of nations moving forward from catastrophic trauma. Much as Japan and the United States transitioned from the total destruction of the Second World War into a deep alliance, the survivors of the American collapse have found a way to coexist and prosper within the nation that emerged from their displacement. The 500-year history taught in our schools is only the second half of a much longer narrative. It marks the point where the original story of the Americas was forcibly